my daughters Jessie and Becky, and my son-in-law Zan. I am grateful to them, to my entire extended family that is watching today on C-SPAN every day of my life. The President nominates the Attorney General to be the lawyer, not for any individual, but for the people of the United States. July 2020 marked the 150th anniversary of the founding of the Department of Justice, making this a fitting time to remember the mission of the Attorney General and of the department. It is a fitting time to reaffirm that the role of the Attorney General is to serve the rule of law and to ensure equal justice under law. And it is a fitting time to recognize the more than 115,000 career employees of the department and its law enforcement agencies and their commitment to serve the cause of justice and protect the safety of our communities. If I have confirmed as Attorney General, it will be the culmination of a career I have dedicated to ensuring that the laws of our country are fairly and faithfully enforced and the rights of all Americans are protected. Before I became a judge almost 24 years ago, a significant portion of my professional life was spent at the Justice Department. As a special assistant to Ben Civiletti, the last of the trio of post-Watergate attorneys general, as a line assistant U.S. attorney, as a supervisor in the criminal division, and finally as a senior official in the department. Many of the policies that the Justice Department developed during those years are the foundation for reaffirming the norms that will ensure that the department adheres to the rule of law. These are policies that protect the independence of the department from partisan influence in law enforcement, that strictly regulate communications with the White House, that establish guidelines for FBI domestic operations and foreign intelligence collection, that ensure respectful treatment of the press, that read the Freedom of Information Act generously, that respect the professionalism of DOJ employees, and that set out the principles of federal prosecution to guide the exercise of prosecutorial discretion. In conversations that I have had with many of you before this hearing, you have asked why I would agree to leave a lifetime appointment as a judge. I have told you that I love being a judge, but I have also told you that this is an important moment for me to step forward because of my deep respect for the Department of Justice and for its critical role of ensuring the rule of law. Celebrating DOJ's 150th year reminds us of the origins of the department, which was founded during Reconstruction in the aftermath of the Civil War to secure the civil rights that were promised in the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. The first Attorney General appointed by President Grant to head the new department led it in a concerted battle to protect Black voting rights from the violence of white extremists, successfully prosecuting hundreds of cases against white supremacist members of the Ku Klux Klan. Almost a century later, the Civil Rights Act of 1957 created the Department's Civil Rights Division with a mission to uphold the civil and constitutional rights of all Americans, particularly some of the most vulnerable members of our society. That mission on the website of the department's Civil Rights Division remains urgent because we do not yet have equal justice. Communities of color and other minorities still face discrimination in housing, in education, in employment, and in the criminal justice system. And they bear the brunt of the harm caused by pandemic, pollution, and climate change. 150 years after the department's founding, battling extremist attacks on our democratic institutions also remains central to the department's mission. From 1995 to 1997, I supervised the prosecution of the perpetrators of the bombing of the Oklahoma City Federal Building, who sought to spark a revolution that would topple the federal government.
I would like to know what type of facts that he has in bringing to this type of conclusion. Let's listen to more of this, because every bit of that in which what I have discovered, in which I spent a great deal of time, not only in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, in studying this particular event, but I also spent a great deal of time in the Waco community, Mount Carmel, in going around getting various testimonies from various people that know just exactly what had happened to the Davidians whenever the ATF decided that they was going to set up some sort of a misguided entrapment towards preying on a bunch of weak-minded people, towards selling them guns that they never should have sold them, and coming in with a warrant over tax violations on the guns. The ordeal turned upside down. It blowed up in their face. ATF made such of a tragic mistake that the FBI immediately took it over within the third day of the 51-day standoff. The reason why Timothy McVeigh done what he done to the Oklahoma authorities is because the Oklahoma authorities, a little later into that 51-day standoff, had been designated by the upper levels of authorities towards moving their headquarters from Texas up to Oklahoma because it was such of a high-profile case. And rather than deal with a great deal of reporters that was swarming the Texas area anyway, they just moved the headquarters out of Texas over to another federal institution, and that's where the Mario building got involved. Where this guy's coming up with this ideal about Timothy McVeigh and Nichols is a long shot, to say the least, in regards towards it being some sort of a revolution to inspire people to overthrow the federal government. I have studied this. This has costed me a great deal of money, time, and yes, even my dignity, pertaining to my pride that I myself was looked upon at one time as being a potential violator or a potential homegrown terrorist due to how the system had become tainted and corrupt in various people within the Bureau that was trying to bring me down simply because I was discovering the truth about not what all went on in, not only what went on in Oklahoma City and what went on in Oklahoma, Mount Carmel, Waco, Texas deal, but what has went on throughout this whole ordeal, going all the way back into the Reagan era, whenever the nuclear arms agreement first got accomplished to begin with. We have certain people in our departments, our federal agencies, the Bureau, that has never given account for what that they didn't do that they should have done towards protecting the American people. Not only with what went on in Waco and what went on in Oklahoma, but what went on with 9/11. And now we're looking at towards what went on pertaining to the coronavirus. This goes beyond just negligence. This goes beyond negligence. This has turned into reckless endangerment of a group of people that said that they cared about the American people, and that's why the American people voted them in power. But in reality, they didn't give a flip about what was happening to us. We can see that now pertaining to the massacres that has went on all over America, that various administrations has not cared for one reason or the other, or they was scared to step up to the plate and do something about our gun laws pertaining to selling average citizens AK-47s and semi-automatic rifles that they never should have had their hands on to begin with. They have allowed for all this bloodshed to fall upon to humanity here in between our borders. And these same politicians, regardless whether they be federal, state, or local, will give an account because they did not put their finger on it. They did not grab the bull by the horns. They did not do what they had promised the American people that they was going to do towards protecting our Constitution and protecting us. Once more, where this guy gets his ideology from is beyond me, because Timothy McVeigh and Nichols was only trying to vindicate the death of those who had died by the hand of the American government over the 51-day standoff that happened in Mount Carmel down towards Waco, Texas. Now let's listen to the rest of his response towards what he's talking about pertaining to the Oklahoma bombing.
Confirmed, I will supervise the prosecution of white supremacists and others who stormed the Capitol on January 6th. A heinous attack.
Let's back up. Apparently he ain't going to say no more about it.
City Federal Building.
Let's back up a little bit more. Stop.
Democratic institutions also remain central to the department's mission. From 1995 to 1997, I supervised the prosecution of the perpetrators of the bombing of the Oklahoma City Federal Building, who sought to spark a revolution that would topple the federal government.
That sought to spark a revolution that would topple the American federal government. Where he comes up with this ideology, I don't know. But unless they can put more together than what they've already put together, what he just got through telling you folks was a lie. Was a cold-blooded, bald-faced lie. At first, whenever the Oklahoma bombing took place, they immediately wanted to blame it on a terrorist group overseas pertaining to a group of Muslims. Within 3 to 4 hours, they dropped that information, took it off the airwaves, because they realized that they already had a suspect pertaining to a cop who had pulled an individual over because his license plate was dangling or hanging off or had fallen off, and come to find out this individual was David Koresh. Various mistakes occurred during the investigation of the Oklahoma ordeal. Not only did it occur ignorantly, but it's believed that it happened intentionally, especially once they identified that there was explosive detonators that had been found in the lower part of the basement, 3 floors down below the child care services. After they had located these detonators, it was never informed to the proper authorities of digging deeper into the possibility of something else during that time. A matter of fact, they'd done their best to bulldoze the building down as quickly as possible, cover up, bury any type of records that the general public may get a hold of, and they put all the blame as an scapegoat on Timothy McVeigh and Nichols. Timothy McVeigh and Nichols deserved to have gotten the punishment that they got. They are never to be looked upon as being heroes. You never want to take the law into your own hands by doing any type of activity like this. But the thing about it is, there was something else that was missing in the puzzle that even Timothy McVeigh and Nichols didn't even know nothing about, pertaining to some extra explosions that was down in the lower part of the basement that had not been used, that had basically transfigurated from one thing into another towards becoming nitroglycerin. Started out being TNT, and then it turned into nitroglycerin that caused the devastation of so many lives the day that the building blowed up. This individual that's talking to you right now is not telling you the full scope of the truth, nothing but the truth, the whole truth in regards to the Oklahoma, Mount Carmel, Waco, Texas incident.
If confirmed, I will supervise the prosecution of white supremacists and others who stormed the Capitol on January 6th. A heinous attack that sought...
Now that's obvious, because everybody's seen who actually attacked the Capitol building. So there's no question and doubt in regards towards him nailing that particular ideology, because everybody's seen it. It wasn't the Panthers. It wasn't the Muslims. It wasn't some other group that come out of some other area. It wasn't the Chinese. Wasn't the Vietnamese. Wasn't the Russians. That was obvious. Everybody's seen it on cameras.
To disrupt a cornerstone of our democracy, the peaceful transfer of power to a newly elected government.
Now that he may have right. I'm going to say he does got right towards trying to overthrow our government from within, pertaining to how a certain individual helped to hype up the general public here in the United States towards them engaging in doing this. And I don't have to embark upon his name of who that I'm talking about.
And that critical work is but a part of the broad scope of the department's responsibilities. Justice Department protects Americans from environmental degradation and the abuse of market power, from fraud and corruption, from violent crime and cybercrime, and from drug trafficking and child exploitation. And it must do all of this without ever taking its eye off of the risk of another devastating attack by foreign terrorists. The Attorney General takes an oath to...
By foreign terrorists. It's not just foreign terrorists that we should be worried about. It should be any type of terrorist, regardless whether they be domestic terrorists or foreign terrorists. How come he went from the Waco deal to the Capitol deal, and now all of a sudden he jumped from there to foreign terrorists? Yes, we should be concerned about foreign terrorists, but at the same time, we should also be concerned about any terrorist. Any terrorist.
Support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Finally nailed it.
I am mindful of the tremendous responsibility that comes with this role. As Attorney General, later Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson famously said, quote, "The prosecutor has more control over life, liberty, and reputation than any other person in America." While prosecutors at their best are one of the most beneficent forces in our society, when they act from malice or other base motives, they are one of the worst. Jackson.
And you just got through explaining yourself of you being biased, of you not expressing the whole truth in regards to the Oklahoma incident. Like I said a while ago, where they're coming up with this ideology towards it being some sort of deep, dark state ideal or ideology that began years and years and years ago with David Koresh and Nichols. They're only blowing smoke. This is their theory. They're wanting to turn this ordeal into something else pertaining to the Oklahoma bombing. And the thing about it is, the Oklahoma bombing was all based around what the American government had done to begin with down in Mount Carmel, Texas. There were certain individuals that was trying to vindicate those people's deaths. That was their motives. It wasn't this long-term, deep, dark conspiracy ideal that we're going to try to engage in overthrowing the government. Now, this guy here, obviously, somebody has henpecked him, and he has come to these type of conclusions illegitimately, as far as I'm concerned, because there was no deep, dark, hidden objective pertaining to Timothy McVeigh and Nichols. The only thing that they was trying to do was vindicate the people who had died 2 years prior to that on the actual date of the Oklahoma bombing.
And then went on to say, the citizen's safety lies in the prosecutor who tempers zeal with human kindness, who seeks truth and not victims.
As far as I'm concerned, this is my opinion. My opinion is don't cost you nothing. Since the Reagans, we have seen this country go downhill in not only financial ruin, but also in the department's ruins towards them doing their jobs and protecting the American people to begin with. And, you know, we talk about the big things. We talk about Afghanistan. We talk about bin Laden. We talk about 9/11 towards being the cornerstone of these violators who are trying to bring harm and hurt into our lives. But the point that I'm trying to make is they should emphasize as much on homegrown terrorists, and should have had since the ordeal that happened in 1995 with Timothy McVeigh and Nichols, and has failed to do so. And if you don't believe me, look at every incident that has occurred of the mass shootings here in America. And if somebody would have been doing their job, it doesn't matter if it was a law enforcement person, it doesn't matter if it was a teacher, it doesn't matter if it was the person themselves that was a friend of the person that done the act under the Good Samaritan law, somebody could have stopped that individual or those individuals from creating havoc upon to society the way that they did. And I'm just going to use the guy out in Las Vegas as an example. Whenever you have a person that is going to basically all the local ammo gun shops in that area, requesting to buy this, and this, and he's continually doing that again and again and again, there should be a red flag in why this individual is doing this. It hasn't been too long ago, I think it was about 20 years ago, maybe a little longer, to where they was taking some sort of drug off of the shelf, pharmaceuticals, that you didn't have to have a prescription for, and they was making meth out of. I forgot now what the substance was. But somebody finally had enough sense to figure out that they was using this to make drugs out of that was ruining people's lives, and they finally got wise and pulled it off the shelves. We as an Americans have failed our own ability to bring safety and concerns to our own country, because we as a society have turned our backs on my brother's keeper. And whenever we are no longer concerned about our neighbors and about our brothers and sisters, regardless whether they live up the street or down the street, and this ain't got nothing to do with being nosy, it don't have nothing to do with prying in other people's business, it don't have nothing to do with stalking, it don't have nothing to do with dibble-dabbing around in somebody's affairs that you shouldn't be dabbling around in. What it's got to do with is our safety and our security here in the United States. Now, some people will say, well, that's meddling. That's meddling because you got your eye across the street pertaining to 3 little children over there that you've already done seen the parents lash out in such of an abrupt way. You're meddling. No, I'm not meddling. No, I'm not meddling. I'm doing that in which what I'm supposed to do as a good Christian Samaritan. And if I see somebody that can't take care of themselves, such as little kids, and if I see that they're in an environment that they shouldn't be in, regardless whether they be taken advantage of, regardless whether they being abused, regardless whether they being neglected towards the parents not taking care of them the way that they should. If I know about it, I'm going to speak up about it because that is my, what? What is it? My constitutional duties as a citizen. You can't just watch somebody perform a crime and think that you can turn your head and act as if that it never occurred. Now you have become an accessory to that crime. You have watched that person commit that crime. And because you didn't make that telephone call, because you didn't ask questions, now you have become an accessory to that crime. Though these are things that is not enforced by our Good Samaritan law rights. A matter of fact, here in Northwest Tennessee, I actually got punished. I got violated for demonstrating those type of actions of my brother and I that was concerned about 3 little children across the road. Rather than us being promoted and patted on the back by law enforcement here in this area towards, Juby, you done a good job, but we appreciate you bringing it to our attention that those children over there was being exposed to an environment that they never should be exposed to. Rather than the law enforcement patting us on the back, they was attacking us. And of course, whenever my brother died, my attorney didn't tell me what was going on pertaining to my date. One thing led into another, to the point that now the very people that kept crying, help, 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 and couldn't get no help, and the very people that was trying to initiate their commitment in the Good Samaritan law regards, has now been punished to the degree that now they throw handcuffs on me and throw me in jail. Throw me in jail for me trying to do a good deed. It would have been different if I was out there with a tripod and a camera every day. It'd have been different if we was out there with guns and scoping in on these people's business. The craziness that went on across the road, and I know that I've got witnesses to prove it. Now, they probably won't come up to the forefront and admit it, but the witnesses one day will give an account for how that they not only remained hush-hush about what was going on, but they was entertained by what was going on here in this neighborhood. They was entertained by it because they wanted Juby to go down. They wanted him to come to his ruin. They was set in trying to destroy the founder of the ministry called the Windmill Ministries. Evil has not only resided, but evil has dictated and dominated the American lives of our everyday occurrences. And we want to ask ourselves, how come the FBI, how come the U.S. Marshals, how come other law enforcement agencies have not been doing their jobs? It's simple. It's simple. The enemy is from within. Now, there's no doubt what Timothy McVeigh and Nichols done the day of the Oklahoma bombing was one of the most horriblest homegrown incidences that has ever befallen upon to the American land. But if you go back, and I'm not trying to justify their actions, but if you go back, and this is where the government is trying to pass the buck, if you'll go back of the core of all that towards what originated that, it was simply because of the 51-day standoff with the Branch Davidians in Mount Carmel right next to Waco, Texas. Everybody and their brother that's got any type of age to them at all, that's probably 40 years older or older, should be able to identify the facts pertaining to this. Like I said, they're trying to turn it into something else pertaining to the Oklahoma incident. And not only are they trying to turn it into something else, but they're still trying to pat themselves on the back for them doing such a lousy job in protecting the American people. And it's obvious that we have seen catastrophe after catastrophe after catastrophe.
Who serves the law and not factional purposes, and who approaches the task with humility. That was the prosecutor I tried to be during my prior service in the Department of Justice. That is the spirit I tried to bring to my tenure as a federal judge. And if confirmed, I promise to do my best to live up to that ideal as Attorney General. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Garland. Before I turn to my questions, I want to lay out a few mechanics for the hearing. Senators will have 8 minutes in the first round of questions, followed by a 5-minute second round. And I ask members to do their best to stay within their allotted time. We will take a break every once in a while for 10 minutes. I'm hoping the first will be sometime near 11 o'clock. At about 12:15 or 12:30, we will break for lunch for 30 minutes. I beg you to stick with that schedule if you can and be back in time so that we can keep the hearing moving along. So let me, at this point, turn to questions. You were sent to Oklahoma City, 1995. What happened there was the deadliest act of homegrown domestic terrorism in modern American history. 168 people have been killed, including 19 children. Hundreds were injured. You were supervising the prosecution of Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, who were accused of being complicit and leading in that destruction. Now, if you are confirmed as Attorney General, which I believe you will be, you will face what is known as the biggest, most complex investigation in Justice Department history. And that is the investigation around the events of January 6th. 230 have been arrested so far. Some 500 are under investigation.
But the main honcho walked away scot-free after influencing and leading the people to the slaughter. Now, does that not speak volumes about the American government towards how it operates from the inside out? That was an entrapment deal that happened January 6th, as far as I'm concerned. Once more, preying on the emotions of weak-minded, strong, progressive patriots that literally, physically thought that they was doing the right thing by going up to the Capitol and obliging what that their chief and commander had told them to do. Just like the same incident in which you probably won't never hear nothing of, towards the ATF that was living, moved in, right in front of the Branch Davidians. They was camouflaged as a group of kids, young kids going to college, and the whole time it was a 7-month stakeout. And if it was just a stakeout, that wouldn't have been such of a bad deal. But when the people that's involved in the stakeout are purposely preying on those type of people by selling them guns, knowing that those type of magazines should not be given over to the general public, then they wanted to violate their rights by saying that they didn't pay for some certain tax, and that was the only reason why that the federal judge gave the authority from sunup to sundown for a no-knock warrant, and that's whenever the raid began, even though they know that the raid, they know that the essential shakedown had been discovered by the Branch Davidians. They still went ahead and went on with it anyway, towards basically spoiling their surprise. And because their surprise had been spoiled, now the Branch Davidians was laying wait whenever the helicopters landed in the front yard and the backyard, towards unleashing hell on the very people that had sold them that type of propaganda and those type of weapons to begin with. What type of government does this to weak-minded people? Or what type of government does this to people that's got strong desires of being a patriot, that's willing to do whatever their chief and commander asks them to do, or suggests for them to do, or leads them into believing to do? What kind of government are we running here that would basically prey on its own people this way? The American people have been blinded. The American people should wake up to these type of fatalities that continue to keep happening again and again and again here in America. New Zealand did. It didn't take New Zealand but once or twice, once they realized that those type of assault weapons had been sold to the general public, the country of New Zealand come down upon to their citizens, and I'm telling you, they come down to the point that if there is another incident that happens in New Zealand, I'd just about be willing to bet money on it. It won't be somebody with an AK or an AR, an automatic assault rifle, that's going to do it. If there is another incident that happens in New Zealand, which hopefully we pray to God that it won't. But these people in America keep wanting to pat themselves on the back and start creating their own facts, which are nothing more than lies. They're half-hearted. They claim that they got into power in office because they're concerned about our welfare pertaining to our safety, but yet no, they keep failing to protect us. And the damnedest thing about it is the American people keep voting these same people in power again and again and again and again. That's the part that I don't understand, other than the core of the origin pertaining to the destruction is not just in certain departments or certain areas. It is here. It is amongst us, living with us and around us. Towards people with the attitude, I don't care. If it's out of sight, out of mind, I don't have to see it, I don't have to hear about it, then I don't have to be concerned about it. As long as it don't affect my life or somebody that I'm associated with pertaining to my loved ones or my friends, as long as it don't come home to me, I could care less. Their attitude here in America has been for the past 35, 40 years. Why do you want to buy the cow when you can get the milk free? Somebody has come in and they have contaminated. They have infiltrated the American minds here in America by thinking that everything is free. And they have contaminated the American minds in them not caring about nothing or nobody other than themselves. This contamination is just as ugly and just as bad, as far as I'm concerned, as the coronavirus, the COVID-19. The only difference is on the coronavirus, you see the results right away on the front end. And with this type of contamination, you actually don't see the results necessarily on the front end, but eventually you will see the results on the back end towards people not caring about each other. My brother's keeper. Throw out the Good Samaritan laws. A matter of fact, not only are we going to throw out the Good Samaritan laws, but we're actually going to punish people that are trying to actively pursue the Good Samaritan laws. Or that's what happened here in the state of Tennessee pertaining to my brother and I, David Jeffrey Jackson, here in Weakley County. I'm pretty sure that all counties are not as corrupt as this one, and not as dumbfounded and as backwards as this one, but there's probably some out there that are even worse than this one, because of the contamination that has befallen up into the laps of the American people. It's really sad, the state that we're in right now. And whenever you got the pot calling the kettle black, you know, you can go through all this finger pointing all you want, but the bottom line is, it's all of our faults. It's each and every American's fault, especially those that want to hide behind the Bible or teach the Bible or practice the Bible pertaining to the Good Samaritan laws. It's definitely their problem. You know, just the other day I had an individual that told me, well, as long as I don't have to be around it or see it, as long as it ain't bothering me, who cares? Who cares was her excuse. I come back at her and I said, I tell you what, if everybody had the same attitude as you, do you not care about your children and about your children's children and your great-grandchildren? Because those are going to be the ones that's going to suffer the consequences. Once more, if you don't see the consequences on the front end, like you do the coronavirus, you eventually will see the complications and the consequences on the back end. Sickness is sickness. The ways of the devil, evil is evil. And this country has been turned over to a wicked, demonic, pathetic spirit that is now wreaking havoc, not only in our law enforcement societies, but in every aspect of our lives. It doesn't matter if it's in our sports. It doesn't matter if it's in our education. It doesn't matter if it's in our schools. It doesn't matter if in our private businesses. It doesn't matter if it's in our courts. It has, I'm going to use this word conservatively, deformed the original intent of what our ancestors, our forefathers, intended for this country to be. And because it has deformed us, we have become radicalized to the point that, hey, if you hear of a massive murder down the road where somebody shot somebody, or they took a gun and they shot themselves, or they swallowed a handful of pills, don't worry about it. As long as it ain't affecting you, and as long as it ain't affecting your household, keep walking. Out of sight, out of mind. That's the attitude that the majority of the American people have. It breaks my heart to even be able to discuss anything like this towards pointing my finger, because there are some good people in America that still does care about not only ourselves, but our future and our future. There are some people that does still care about their brother's keeper. But it's very few. Very, very few. And we can see the characteristics in our courts and in our law enforcement agencies, the way that they have handled things in the past 25 or 30 years.
Know that the death of at least one police officer is one of the major elements in this investigation. I'd like to ask you to reflect on two things. What's going on in America? Was Oklahoma City just a one-off, unrelated to what happened here? Can you measure, based on what you've learned so far, what kind of forces are at work to divide and destroy the American dream?
Evil
Secondly,
forces.
When it comes to this prosecution, are there elements that we should consider in terms of law enforcement to deal with this rising threat to the American democracy?
Thank you, Senator. Thank you very much for the opportunity to address the committee today. I'm grateful for this opportunity. I don't think that this is necessarily a one-off. FBI Director Wray has indicated that the threat of domestic terrorism, and particularly of white supremacist extremists, is his number one concern in this area. This is coupled with an enormous rise in hate crimes over the past few years. There is a line from Oklahoma City, and there's another line from Oklahoma City all the way back to the experiences that I mentioned in my opening with respect to the battles of the original Justice Department against the Ku Klux Klan. We must do everything in the power of the Justice Department to prevent...
Oh, come on. Now he's saying that the Timothy McVeigh Nichols deal has something to do with the Klansmen. Oh, my God. That can be just about as far away from the truth as daylight is dark. Now, whenever it comes to the unjustfulness that is occurring here in America, yeah, I can see where he's brushing up against similarities. But, you know, there was similarities pertaining to how that they was dictating and dominating the black man back during the Civil War. So this, I'm going to use the word infiltration, that has come over to America towards not only wanting to genocide the red man, but now it has spread abroad. You know, they first started out, well, we're going to get rid of the red man. Well, they went so far as finally somebody raised a flag and said, enough is enough. After Jackson done what he done. Andrew. Then they went after the black man. And it wasn't until the 60s until they said enough is enough. Well, now in 2020, we've had all these uprisings pertaining to seeing cities and towns burn. And obviously, these same people still does not get the message towards why these people are doing this. And it's not just that Black Lives Matter, because Black Lives does matter. But the thing about it is, all lives matter. It doesn't matter if it's Vietnamese, Japan, Chinese, whatever. And right now we're seeing a big, big movement towards people attacking the Asian communities. And we're seeing a big, big movement towards anti-Semitism, to the point that if you are a true believer in Christ and you are letting your light shine, such as I have been known of doing in the past, and other good ministers has too as well, you are more apt to this type of environment of anti-Semitism than probably ever before. So the contamination has grown. The cancer has become bigger. We haven't stomped the fire out. We haven't put the fire out. If anything, the fire's gotten bigger. And we can see this now pertaining to what has occurred on January the 6th. right here in our homeland. And it's been brewing. It's been brewing. It didn't matter if it was the first attack upon the Twin Towers, 1993, during the incident that happened in Waco, or the Ruby Ridge deal, or the Atlanta Olympics being blown up, or the abortion clinic being blown up. It's been brewing. Then if you topple that with all these other massive killings that's been going on, yeah, it's been brewing. But nobody wanted to put their finger on it. Nobody wanted to say enough is enough. And now we got the same people in there that's supposed to be the experts that probably, if the truth be known, couldn't find their ass with both hands.
This kind of interference with the policies of American democratic institutions. And I plan, if you now confirm me for Attorney General, to do everything in my power to ensure that we are protected.
Judge Garland, it goes without saying.
Protected from what? Protected from ourselves? Protected from these agencies that's not doing their jobs? Protect us until the next occurrence takes place? There has to be a movement of the spiritual cancer that various pillars of the communities, and I'm talking about the elderly people, I'm talking about the people that's now in their 70s, some of them's in their 80s, some of them's in their 60s. These are the people that has allowed for this stronghold to become even stronger. I've said before and I'll say again, if the same group of people less than a quarter of a mile from here, the way the crow flies, called the Wiccans, if they have tried to have moved in here in the 60s, or the 70s, or the 80s, possibly even the early 90s, they would have run them out of town on a rail. But because everybody has become so liberal, and because each man fends for his own, nobody wants to stick together whenever it comes to the righteousness of God. Nobody wants to bond together whenever it comes to looking at sin towards it being sin. And because we have compromised the Word of God, just as Jesus talked about in the Bible, that if you continue to keep watering down the Word, it's just as salt in losing its potency. That what good is it other than to be trampled down upon the foot of man? It's the same way with your Good Samaritan laws, that if everybody is not under the same guideline in practicing the same thing, united we stand, divided we fall, we are looking towards a calamity. We are looking towards a fall. Now, certain people can get up and they can pat this guy on the back on what kind of job that he done in his previous career. And I'm sure probably 85 to 90, maybe 95% of the time, he probably done a halfway decent job on the calls that he made. I'm sure that he knows the law and he knows what's acceptable and what isn't acceptable. But I'm also sure of this. Whenever it comes to continually manipulating or brainwashing the American people, he has taken the initiative to do just exactly that, which, as far as I'm concerned, is part of the problem versus part of the solution to the problem, by getting up on national TV and spreading his propaganda about the Oklahoma bombing without never, I haven't heard it yet, mentioning Mount Carmel Waco, Texas, and the Branch Davidians. Once more, you can't just look at part of the truth. You got to look at the whole truth. That would be like us looking at the Hatfields and McCoys and saying, oh, there was no Hatfields. It was only the McCoys. No, it was the Hatfields and McCoys. One of them lived on one side of the river, the other one lived on the other side of the river. And because of their disturbances, and because of the bloodshed that followed their disturbances, is basically what made them famous in people wanting to know about the Hatfields and McCoys. But the point that I'm trying to make is this: you cannot take away from one or the other without it being a whole. The same way with the Oklahoma bombing, that people to this day in Oklahoma still refuses to acknowledge towards what actually occurred in Mount Carmel, and how that the Texas government authorities mishandled that from A to Z, that caused the death and the injury 2 years prior to the date of the Timothy McVeigh and Nichols, Oklahoma bombing.
I want to make it a record. We abhor violence, whether it comes from the right or left, whatever its source. It has no place in responsible constitutional dialogue in America. Currently, though, we are faced with elements that weren't there 25 years ago in Oklahoma City. A proliferation of weapons. Secondly, social media and the internet, which serves as a gathering place for many of these domestic terrorists. What are your thoughts about how we should deal with those elements from the law enforcement viewpoint?
First of all, you haven't done your jobs ever since the Timothy McVeigh Nichols Oklahoma bombing that happened in 1995. You haven't been on top of your game. And now you've allowed for all these people to gather up all these weapons to the point of a major government takeover. Who has caused this? Who has generated this? I personally put the blame off on what occurred in 1988 during Ronald Reagan's administration towards them trying to stifle out a ministry that should have went forth conquering and to conquer. They didn't want to conquer sin. Once more, we ain't going to have this man telling us what to do. This man ain't going to rule over us. Okay, if righteousness isn't going to rule over you, then unrighteousness will rule over you. Well, what in the world's unrighteousness? It's called wicked sin. It's called evil and demonic. Everything from abortions, taking unwedded children and marriages of wife swapping and husband swapping and bedroom swapping, from cheating on your taxes to lying and not telling the truth, to taking the Bible out of our court systems, to being $28+ trillion in debt. That's what it amounts to. The Reagans and the Bushes made a choice for the majority of the American people, especially whenever Mr. Bush Sr. respectfully said it looks like America is going to hell in a handbasket. Well, not only was he right, but these same type of people helped put it there. They promoted it. Just like what happened up there with the Senate, with the court system, grand jury, the Supreme Court, during Obama's administration. Whenever they passed the law in America to legalize same-sex marriage, that was a cancer that continuously to this day has spread abroad all over the planet. And there's very few countries that still to this day acknowledge that it is ungodly and wicked. And usually the countries that I'm talking about that are against homosexuality are the very countries that promote death and destruction. As the old saying goes, we have jumped out of the fire pan into the fire. And you wonder how come we're seeing these drastic weather-related events. You wonder how come we're going from not gradual cold, but instant cold, to instant hot, to instant dry, to instant wet, seeing all these drastic weather events that none of them are just gradually getting worse, but they're intensifying and getting worse. You wonder how come the weather has become erratical? It's very simple. The Bible says that these will be the sorrows that will be fallen upon to a society or a group of people. That the more that the people become erratical, the more that Mother Nature, more that the forces of elements will become that much more erratical to the point that once they reach a level of Sodom and Gomorrah, then there'll literally be fire that will come out of the heavens, that will rain upon to them, that will destroy everybody. If they continue on the path that they're on, it's just a matter of time before a major event like a solar flare, a meteor coming out of the sky, a super major earthquake that's probably going to be somewhere in the 9.2, 9.5 range. It's just a matter of time before more sorrows fall upon to humanity because of what humanity is doing to not only God, but to doing to themselves. And I hate to sit here and say this. It kind of sounds like I'm the bad news bearer, but the truth of the matter is that this is the let me get my words right here. This is the law of gravity that not only is pertaining to what goes up must come down, but this is the law of gravity that you are what you eat. Whatever that you teach, listen to, consume, it will eventually come out. And that is what we're seeing now, is all this hate, all this bigotry, all this Semitism, anti-Semitism, all these people with all these guns. And of course, if you'll compile that with the internet, you basically have an oncoming perfect storm that if certain people aren't smart enough to put the flame out, the flames are only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And as the flames get bigger, the wrath of God gets stronger. The sorrows of God becomes even intensified more.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I certainly agree that we are facing a more dangerous period than we faced in Oklahoma City at that time. From what I have seen, and I have no inside information about how the department is developing its work, it looks like an extremely aggressive and perfectly appropriate beginning to an investigation all across the country in the same way our original Oklahoma City investigation was, but many times more. I don't yet know what additional resources would be required by the department. I can assure you that this will be my first priority and my first briefing when I return to the department if I'm confirmed.
Judge Garland, several years ago, I went to an immigration court hearing in downtown Chicago. It was in a high-rise loop building. I met the immigration court judge. She'd been on the job almost 20 years. It seemed like a very conscientious and fair person. She asked me to stay for the docket call, particularly for the first clients on the docket. The first clients on the docket were a 4-year-old girl named Marta. When the judge asked that all of the people in the courtroom be seated, she had to be helped into the chair. It was too tall for her to get into. She was handed a stuffed animal to hold during the hearing. At the same table was a young boy with the unlikely name Hamilton, who was given a little matchbox car, which he played with on top of the table. He was 6 years old. They were the victims of the zero tolerance policy. We remember it well. Thousands of children were forcibly removed from their parents, separated, and many times lost in the bureaucracy. Some have incorrectly stated that that administration policy by the Trump administration was just a continuation of Obama-era policy. That isn't true. The Obama administration did not have policies that resulted in the mass separation of parents and children. And on rare occasions, separations occurred. This was due to suspicion of trafficking or fraud, not because of an intentional, cruel policy to separate children. The Justice Department's Inspector General conducted an investigation of the zero tolerance policy and noted that the Justice Department was, quote, the driving force, close quote, in that policy. There is still a lot that we do not know about that policy and the accountability for the officials who were responsible for it. So let me ask you this. This committee is going to hold oversight hearings to get to the bottom of it. Will you commit to cooperate with those investigations?
Senator, I think the oversight responsibility of this committee is one of its very most important things. It's a duty imposed by the Constitution, and I greatly respect it. I think that the policy was shameful. I can't imagine anything worse than tearing parents from their children. And we will provide all of the cooperation that we possibly can.
I thank you for that. When it comes to congressional oversight, this committee has a role in restoring independence and integrity to the Justice Department through oversight hearings. It has a long-standing tradition of holding annual Justice Department oversight hearings. But sadly, it's been 3 years since the Attorney General has been called before this committee. I pledge that as chairman, I'll hold annual DOJ oversight hearings where members from both sides of the aisle can ask important questions of you in that capacity. I don't want to go into detail, but ask you, obviously, would you agree to cooperate in that commitment to oversight hearing?
Of course, if I am confirmed, I will certainly cooperate.
And when requests are made for information by members of the committee, I hope that I can also have your commitment to cooperation in providing timely answers.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we will be as responsive as we possibly can. As I said, I have great respect for and belief in the oversight role of this committee.
Thank you. Senator Grassley?
Yeah. Since you're a currently sitting judge, you're bound by the Code of Conduct of U.S. judges. Nevertheless, I hope that we can get frank answers from you on your views. And when we talked last on the phone, you told me you would get guidance from the administrative office on what you can or can't say. I assume that you sought that guidance. If so, what did they advise you?
Yes, Senator Grassley, I did. And they advised me just as you and I thought that they would. Canon 3 bars me from commenting on any pending or impending case that is in any court, but I am free to talk about policy with you.
Okay. I'm going to go to the Durham investigation. At Barr's hearing, he stated the following regard to Mueller's investigation, quote, "It's virtually important that the special counsel be allowed to complete his investigation." Also at that same hearing, Senator Feinstein asked, quote, "Will you commit to providing Mr. Mueller with the resources, funds, and time needed to complete his investigation?" End of quote. Attorney General Barr answered Senator Feinstein.
Once more, this is just playing tick for tack in regards towards them talking about the formalities. Basically, politic talk of what they're supposed to say. And it's one thing to say it, and it's another thing to actually mean it. Once more, whenever you're dealing with half-hearted people, and whenever you're dealing with people that's been in these type of offices for some of them 30, 35, 40 years, until you drain the swamp, just like Donald Trump talked about, towards the system being broke, or the system being rigged, or the system being corrupt, until you're willing to vote out this type of illegitimacies and put in a better branch of thinking of people, all you're doing is kicking the can down the road, until another event happens, another mass shooting happens, another Timothy McVeigh bombing happens, another 9/11 happens, another deal happens down the road towards your daughter or your granddaughter being raped or murdered or molested. All they're doing is putting a Band-Aid on the problem and not actually attacking the problem. The fact of the matter is, these government officials have failed us. They have failed us, and as far as I'm concerned, every one of them needs to hold their heads in shame.
If confirmed, will you commit to providing Special Counsel Durham with the staff, resources, funds, and time needed to thoroughly complete the investigation?
So, Senator, I don't have any information about the investigation.
I hope that this guy does a lot better job in investigating the January 6th Capitol insurrection. A whole lot more so than what he done with the Oklahoma bombing. Because as far as I'm concerned, he has added a great deal of elements into the Oklahoma incident that simply was not true. I will tell my viewers that, and I will continue to stay with this story that I know is true. Now, once more, people in America has the right. They can believe what they want to believe about what they want to believe. And if you want to believe that it was justifiable in poking holes in the side of a building with a tank after the 51-day standoff and basically turning that incident that happened down there into nothing but a barbecue towards killing them people. And if you want to believe that a Ryder truck sitting in front of the building, of the Mario building, the Oklahoma building, that whenever it exploded, took the inside of that building and throwed the debris back towards the Ryder truck, if you want to believe this type of nonsense, you have that right. You have that delegated right that you can believe whatever you want to believe. You can believe that the sky is purple instead of it being blue. You can believe that water is dry instead of it being wet. You can believe that good is bad and bad is good if that's what you choose to do. But these are the elements that has got us where we are today towards a society that is turning against itself and has become so unsafe, so uncertain, we really don't know what's going to occur, not just from one day to another, but from 1 hour to another. And I ain't just talking about the events happening overseas in other countries pertaining to Turkey and Syria and the Middle East and China and Russia and India and Africa. I'm talking about the things that's going on right here in the USA. It has gotten so displacent that we actually don't know from one day to another what we're going to hear, what we're going to have to face. I mean, I never would have thought in a million years that I would have seen somebody take airplanes and turn them into missiles and kill almost 3,000 people that day that basically shut the American government down. I never would have thought that I would have seen two individuals take a homemade bomb made out of ammonium nitrate and kill as many people as what happened, or they claim it what happened. But I'm sure that there was more involved with that situation other than the ammonium nitrate. We're tired of hearing the half-hearted truths. The American people is tired of being lied to, simply because of various authorities that want to protect their own careers and protect their own selves. The American people are tired of it, and that's the reason why that we're seeing what we're seeing towards the resistance of going up against the system. Good luck to all of us as we end our program here at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255, and shalom. Shalom in the Hebrew tongue towards may peace be everlasting with you, for you, and in you. God bless you, and God bless America, and thank you for listening.